they just go right up into the yard. So there's a little green belt kind of right behind where they're at. They just come right out, walking around the yard, walking down the street. It's crazy.
I told him we ran into some local folks here. We had took a walk, and the wife of the couple was like, we have all of the animals. And I was like, well, I'm from bobcat bear territory. So, they just run around in my yard back home. So I'm like, yeah, it's not that bad. And they were like, well, we got rattlesnakes. I said, well, they just popped that. All
right. Enjoy those. Yeah, we're gonna go ahead
and scorpions.
Yeah, that too. That too.
All right, y'all. Well, we don't want to keep folks too long, and we know we got folks that are still joining, but I definitely want to help Felicia kick off tonight, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to welcome folks. I know we're still giving people a couple minutes to get on, but we haven't been able to have an annual meeting where we've been able to be face to face with one another and kind of fellowship in a sense, and so we're looking forward to being post-COVID at some point, but I did want to at least, at the very minimal, highlight some of the work that the CPC has been doing, since this will technically be our last community engagement meeting of the year, for December at least, before we go into 2022. But I'm going to drop the link of the annual report for 2020 that we published actually a couple months ago, but just want to make sure community members have access to it quickly and not having to kind of dig through the website. But I wanted to do a little bit of a recap and highlight of some of the work that's come out of the CPC, not only for 2021, but just to give a couple of highlights of work that was done by the commission in 2020 as well too. So I still see we got a few more folks joining, but I wanted to at least kick the meeting off with that. I'm hoping as the ED and kind of spokesperson, one of the spokespeople for the commission, that in the future, this will be a meeting, hopefully that'll be in person at some point for sure. I'm going to, since we actually have a chat function here, I'm going to drop the link for everyone. Felicia, if you could eventually make me a co-host, because it doesn't show where I can send this to everybody. Maybe you can even copy it and paste it later, but I put a link in there, Felicia, if you could send it to the participants that are in the meeting now, that redirects everyone to the annual report for 2020 that's on the commission's website. But for now, I will just talk a little bit about some of the highlights of the year for 2021. We kicked off our first state, independent state legislative agenda, and began a work group for state legislative agenda. We wrote a letter to OIR back in September 2020, and it was the first time that the commission had submitted its 2021 legislative priorities to be included in the city's legislative agenda. And there were a lot of really great priorities that we included, as you all have seen through the last legislative session of the CPC. Presented issues like the removal of arbitration, decertification, the independent investigations, obviously the tear gas ban, and things like ending qualified immunity. We also saw where at the beginning of January, we were able to work with OIR and talk about have them do a presentation on lobbying for the commission. That was all something that was very new for us, but we were eager to engage in and begin to go down that path. Our amazing policy team and commissioners that sat on the state legislative agenda work group were able to present a multitude of recommendations and priorities that the commission was able to track during the 2021 legislative session. Another thing to highlight for the year that for folks that have talked about the work that we've done or have not been as included in the work that we've done or have not heard about it, I want to take again the opportunity to announce some of those things here too. And that was the town hall that we conducted in January with actually the Seattle Police Department around their police policy changes to the use of force and crowd control. There were working recommendations that came out of that special meeting, and there was a letter that was presented to SPD on the proposed changes. We did that and provided a response letter in January and February. They're also in February of 2021, earlier in the year, we conducted another special meeting where the commission as a whole, hosted a meeting with community stakeholders and an additional meeting with the community at large to provide information and gather feedback about Seattle Police Department's collective bargaining process. The CPC was able to submit those recommendations to the LRPC concerning the bargaining process and contracts, and we were able to elect pretty much a technical advisor, Ms. Suzette Dickerson, who has been representing the commission in that process, and we're grateful to them. In
Brittany,
April, mhm.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I want to make sure that Emily received your request.
I didn't send it to Emily, but we'll get to it. I'm gonna wrap up real quick with a couple
Okay.
more things, okay?
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right.
And so in April, and then I'll turn the meeting back over to Felicia. I just wanted to highlight is, an ordinance requirement. We are to highlight the work that we have done and refer to the things that will be coming up in our upcoming annual report. So I'm going to just wrap up with a couple more things. We also had the first ever publication of our police accountability recommendation tracker. The CPC published this in April. Acronym was PART. It was a publicly accessible dashboard that tracks recommendations, responses, and implementation statuses issued by the accountability partners from 2018 to date. And then something else to note, in September, we also were able to also publicize the CPC's accountability ordinance tracker, which was unanimously adopted, for those that do not know, in 2017 by the council, which basically mandates police disciplinary reforms created by the OIG. It made the CPC permanent and expanded the powers and scope of the civilian-led accountability agency. So this dashboard, it tracks the purposes, duties, and responsibilities of the ordinance. And so I will, if there are opportunities for folks to comment at another time or ask questions later in the meeting, I hopefully will still be around, but if not, most of my team will be here. I just wanted to again highlight some of the work of the commission throughout the year and the work that we'll continue to be tasked to do in the upcoming year. Thank you, Felicia. I'll give your meeting back to you.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. So the next thing we just had is Dr. Kelly on the call.
Hi, Felicia. I'm here.
Hi, Dr. Kelly. So I was just hoping that you would just give a high overview over what's to come in the next next 3 meetings or so. Just what to expect for the why we bring in the CIT and what to expect for the next coming meetings.
Absolutely. Thank you, Felicia. And welcome, everyone. Yeah, this, we're, I think, at an exciting point with the consent decree. The monitoring team has been working for the past 6+ months, or so really the past year, to develop a methodology around assessing the Seattle Police Department around 4 main categories, including crisis intervention, including stops and detentions, use of force, which would also include under crowd management settings, as well as supervision. And so we've been working through the measures for that and the assessment. And what we want to do is really bring those to the community, to all of you, to help understand really where the consent decree process has gone over the past 10 years, really giving some new insight into what has been accomplished over that time. Because there are a lot of people who are new to the process who just over the past really couple of years or so have engaged more directly in policing and what policing may look like in the future. And so getting them up to speed on the goals of the consent decree, helping them to understand what the current state is of MPD and the city's work around policing, and then leaning a bit into the future to say what should we be doing in 2022 and beyond. So we're going to do a series of community engagement sessions in collaboration with CPC, so the monitoring team in collaboration with CPC, to engage all of you in that work. We'll be starting in January on January 11th. So this follows a cadence of the normal timing for the community engagement sessions. So on January 11th, we'll come back in the monitoring team along with Chief Diaz from SPD and other officials from SPD and CPC, and of course all of you, to look at, on that day, we'll look at crisis interventions, the actual data from the assessments on crisis intervention to bring that to the community, to have you understand it and to talk about it and look at what may happen next. We wanted this session tonight to be a bit of a precursor to that. So to better, to help everyone understand what crisis intervention means, what that may look like from the day-to-day activities of an officer, the broad kind of parameters of it, so that we can go into then the January session well-informed to be able to look at that data. Then on February 8th, we'll do another session on stops and detentions. So looking at the assessment around stops and detentions, and again, showcasing the data and having dialogue with the community on what this means, what we've learned from it, how this compares to lived experience, and what we need to do going forward. And then on March 8th, we'll have another session, same time as all these other ones here. And March 8th will be around use of force, just kind of normal definitions of that, plus as well as under crowd management settings and protests. And so we'll be looking at that that evening. There'll be three kind of big buckets of information we're really hoping to get from community going forward across all those areas. And actually, I should just mention as well, there's a fourth category of supervision, and we'll be embedding that into the other three major categories, and supervision touches each one of those. So just wanted to mention that. So there'll be three primary areas that we really want community input in broad ways, and then we'll kind of drill into them during the sessions. But one is, based on that assessment data and the discussion we'll have in the community engagement sessions, what do you think that the city broadly on its own should be doing to improve that area, to drive innovation in that area, to have more reform if necessary? Just where should the city, without federal oversight potentially, go next with that? The second major question we'll ask all of you based on the data from the assessments is, what should CPC really take on for 2022 and going forward around things like policy, coming up with practice innovations, research areas, whatever it may be that you think would be best for CPC to really sink some time into and sink their teeth into over the coming months, to help, again, advance that particular area to make it better over time. And then third will be, are there areas still from that we want federal oversight to continue on and to track progress on in those categories of use of force, crisis intervention, stops and detentions, et cetera, that we should inform the court to say, if the community thinks that the monitoring team should stay in place to be able to track and measure these particular areas. So again, we'll come to you with the data. We're gonna have a community meeting and say, here's what this looks like. Here's the current status of SPD as well as compare it to previous years, and ask you for your guidance and insights and ideas on those three things that I talked about. So we'll start that again on January 11th, and then we'll have a session on February 8th and March 8th to move that forward. Then we'll take your ideas and insights, and we'll package those up with the monitoring team's findings from those assessments. We'll put all that together and bring that to the federal court to decide what steps may be necessary, if at all, for federal oversight going forward. So we're really looking at this to be somewhat of a time, a moment in the history of the consent decree to re-engage the community on this and to have you really drive where this may go next. So we're looking forward to partnering with CPC on that and with all of you to bring that forward early next year. Felicia?
Yes, thank you so much. That's great. Are there any questions briefly, and it's because we don't want to delay the presentation, because I think you guys would really get a lot of value out of it, and especially under the circumstances that we just talked about, so that you'll have that background knowledge. Are there any questions? Okay, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to.
There's a question. Dr. Gill has their hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't see that. Dr. Gill?
Yeah, no, just briefly, and we can talk about it more later.
Okay.
My concern is there's a lot of emphasis on giving information to the community and talking about what really would fall into policy and training without really talking about accountability. And I can have more to say about that later, but without accountability, policy and training are rather pointless.
So, and I understand that point, but that's the whole basis of, first we got to give the information, and then we can take that further and go to the next stage. You know, and also if you have concerns or questions that we don't cover or talk about in these sessions, please don't ever hesitate to email me so that I can follow up and maybe, you know, be able to bring some of that back to the table. So I appreciate you bringing that up, but just hold on, we're not there yet. We're going to take this one step at a time and slow it down a little bit for others who don't have as much background and as much information as some of us do. And that's the point of doing this, okay? So just be patient. Without further ado,
Alicia,
I want to
really quick. Yeah. This is Alvin from Neighborhoods. I just wanted to ask a question because I was looking at I was listening to the meetings. Was there 4 meetings that are I got January 11th, February 8th, March 8th. Were those the 3 or is there 4?
Well, this one is actually the 4th. We kind of shifted things around just a little bit because we really thought it was important to get the full presentation from CIT, from crisis intervention team to you know, put into real perspective some of the findings and some of the questions that will probably surround the crisis intervention, since that's like one of the biggest hot topics in our city right now.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Does that make sense, Alvin?
That does. Yes.
Okay. So this is actually the 1st or the 4th, but total.
Gotcha.
4.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Eric, I don't think I see any more hands up. So we're going to have Lieutenant Piscowski. He's the lieutenant over the crisis intervention team, and he's going to give you a little bit of insight and background on how they do their work and the crisis calls that come through our city. Thank you. I appreciate you for being here.
Thank you, Felicia. I just appreciate the opportunity that we can talk about the work that we do, and you know, give the group collectively a little bit of background. So let's see if I can share my screen, and let's see if I can do this correctly. Can you give me permission to share my screen?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Is that Emily? Thank you so much.
Okay, Eric, you should be able to now.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. So, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. I'm working off 2 different screens here, so not sure if I can see everybody's reactions. So let's see if that works. Okay. So this is just, and I can provide a you know, version of this that's going to be in a PDF if you guys would like to see this, but there's a lot of stuff on here. I figured I would just go over some of the information quickly and give you all a general background, and then leave it open for some general questions and see if I can't clarify some stuff. So again, I'm Eric Piskonski. I'm currently the lieutenant over the crisis response unit and directed outreach. I've been with this unit now for about 6.5 years in various roles. And as you can see there from the screen, the Seattle Police Department has had a crisis intervention team starting since back in 1998. So it's not a new concept to Seattle. It's not a new concept of recognizing that there's a need there with a lot of the folks that we're going to encounter in our capacity. Going back to 2010, we were able to launch a 2-year pilot program in which we first brought in a mental health professional and launched what's referred to as a co-responder team. So we had a clinician in the car with a cop and going out and being able to respond to calls in progress and be there as a resource for patrol. And then on the back end, conduct any sort of potential follow-up that might be applicable, making referrals, trying to connect people to various services. That grew. We were able to get that budgeted back in 2012. And we continued to grow that. Obviously, with the settlement agreement, there were some key aspects to all things CIT. So that gave us a little bolstering of support there. And we were able to add additional mental health professionals. We were able to add additional officers to our unit, and got up to a capacity of 5 full-time officers, 5 full-time mental health professionals, and a sergeant that oversees that group, which is what I was doing prior to becoming the lieutenant in the unit here. So that's how we operate in our team, which is a small team. And then I'll talk a little bit about the department as a whole, but that's our crisis response unit is what that looks like. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So I put this up here. This is just our mission as a unit, right? We want to be that invaluable resource. We have a skill set that is very focused in what we do up here. So the crisis response unit, we are not responding to 911 calls in general. As in, we're not going to respond out for an auto theft call or anything that might be along the parking complaint. We're solely focused on the behavioral health calls that come out, and so that's where our proficiency comes in, is being able to navigate through that system, and essentially taking that approach, that holistic approach of, we're the first responders that are going out on most of these calls, but not necessarily the most appropriate outcome for these individuals that we're encountering. And so it's redirecting them to those appropriate services as best we can. And there you go. So some of that stuff right there. We do operate on what we refer to as an intercept continuum. And that looks a little like this. Oh, that's the next slide. So for our priorities, what we're looking at is really being that resource to assist with patrol, navigate through some of the more complex encounters that might be out there, and do that follow up on the back end. Again, as I say, so we have a fair number of repeat folks that we're going to run into, and we're going to see if we can interdict in that pattern, so that they're not engaging in 911 services, but maybe engaging in the other services that are out there, various service providers. And that you can see there in the middle of the slide, our 2 target populations, if you will, are those that are presenting that highest likelihood of imminent harm, and those that are disproportionate utilizers of 911 services, and see if we can change that equation a little bit, so that police are not the first interaction there. We also handle the extremist protection orders, and I can talk about that a little bit later, but that has to do with firearms and petitioning for the temporary removal of those for individuals. And obviously going along with that is doing threat assessments that might be associated with that and interactions. And then making those referrals and working hand in hand with the designated crisis responders and the DCRs that are out there. This is that model that I referred to, the sequential intercept model. So again, when we look at behavior that we might encounter, that an individual might be exhibiting, down at the far end of harmless symptomatic behavior, up to the high end where there might be a criminal interaction and or a high risk situation, a life safety incident. So all the options that are on the range in between. And this is the model that we try and follow, both with our practice, with our training, and with our policies that are associated with those interactions. Okay. So again, this is from the settlement agreement. The CPC was a body that was created out of the settlement agreement. The other side of that is the Crisis Intervention Committee, or the CIC. So that was another body that was created out of the settlement agreement. And these are the focus points in that agreement as where they're weighing in on, right? So they are very heavily involved in policies and procedures, resources, the training that goes into play, and then the program in general to make sure that we as law enforcement, and we specifically the Seattle Police Department, are focusing on the best tools and the best practices that those out in the service provider community are making suggestions to us as. So really, what is best for their clientele and how we as law enforcement can interact with folks and the resources and services that are out there. This is just a sampling of some of the agencies and entities that are part of that CIC. There are many more, but this is just a sampling of those agencies. This is right out of our policy, and this was created in conjunction with both the original monitor team and with the CIC. It's what's in our policy and how we define what a behavioral crisis is. I'll let you guys read that if you'd like.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? I mean, I would love to read it, but I want to get a better understanding on what the crisis intervention sees us as, if you don't mind.
You mean what the CIC sees us as, or as just?
Sorry, yes, CIC. Sorry, yeah, I know you said.
Okay. That's okay.
Yeah, I know you stated y'all take a look over the mission statement, but I would expect for someone that's doing the presentation to kind of give us their expectation on what their thoughts on exactly what this mission statement looks like, if you don't mind.
Well, this is just a definition that's in our policy rather than our mission statement. I'm happy to go over that further if you'd like. We can circle back to that. This right here, though, with how we're defining what an episode of behavioral crisis might look like, what might generate an interaction with law enforcement, right? What's generating a 911 call, what officers might encounter out there. And really, it's a very broad definition, and it's makes up a very large percentage of the calls that get dispatched for law enforcement, and calls that are coming in. So any type of disturbance that might be related to some sort of, like I say here, mental or emotional distress, but it's very broad in definition, and like I said, it was created at the recommendations of the Crisis Intervention Committee and the parties that sit on there, and we put it together and agreed with it. Is that giving a little better explanation on it?
That was fine. Thank you. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Lieutenant, Wisconsin, maybe let me just press on that just a little bit more. I'm
Sure.
curious, maybe this is where Deontay, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. So this definition presents a lot of latitude or discretion for officers that are part of the crisis intervention to make some judgment calls when you're out in the community. Can you just talk to us a bit about like the day in the life of your people, and as they're using this definition, and then having going to certain calls, like how that discretion is used?
Sure. And part of that, one of the reasons that I'll kind of roll into this as we talk a little bit more with some of these slides, but part of the reason for the broad definition is we want to try and capture any possible interaction that could be otherwise, categorically put in the bucket of a crisis call. So one of the things that was done in conjunction with this is we created what's referred to as a crisis template or a behavioral health template. And the whole thing was pre DOJ and settlement agreement and all of that. We were not tracking these interactions, right? So we really were not, we had nothing to draw on, right? So historically, the only time law enforcement was documenting any of these types of encounters was when there was an arrest, when we sent someone up to the hospital, or if a use of force occurred. Otherwise, officers were going out and handling, and I use the air quotes, crisis calls on a pretty regular basis, right? A 911 call comes out and, hey, there's a lady in the park yelling at a tree, taking some of her clothes off. Okay, those calls come out every day across the city, or a type of call like that. Historically, officers would go out to that call, they'd assess the situation, determine if there was any crime that was occurring, determine if they met any criteria to take them up to the hospital, and maybe ask them if they wanted some help. And if none of those fit the checkbox, if you will, they would leave, essentially, right? They'd be, okay, well, let us know if you need anything, and they would clear the call. No paper was written, no documentation was done, no anything. And again, this was all pre-body cameras and any of that kind of stuff. So there's really no record of that interaction that ever occurred. And so one of the goals was to say, all right, can we come up with a definition that is as broadly encompassing as possible? And then, because we now have that in policy defined, now we put in the other requirement of saying, and we would like you to fill out a crisis template every time you have one of those interactions, right? So now we can start putting those beans in the bucket and start counting them and saying, okay, now we can really have data, and we can get into that data-driven process of, well, how many interactions are we actually having? What are the dispositions? What are those outcomes? What words, actions, and behaviors was the subject exhibiting? What decision-making was the officer doing? What skills did they employ? Was the individual armed or not armed? Was there an arrest? Was there no arrest? All of those little data points, which I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute, can be captured. So that was really the purpose of coming up with this broad definition as best as possible. And yes, it does take some some discretion and some interpretation by officers, but that's also why we wanted to make it broad, to try and cast that wide net. And then in conjunction with all the training that the officers get, which again, I'll talk about here briefly, we also do training for all of the 911 operators so that they can have a general baseline understanding of if a call comes in, and kind of totality of the circumstances, the words that they're hearing, the whatever's going on, they might be able to go, okay, this sounds like it might be a crisis call, and we're going to go ahead and dispatch it that way. In some ways it's the best guess because we can't read into someone's mind, and it's certainly more difficult for 911 operators that are just over the phone and aren't there on the scene. So then it falls on the officers to be able to assess the situation once they arrive. Did that assist in that a little bit better?
Yeah, I think that's good, and it just partly goes to the point of that over time, the city, whether it's, crisis intervention teams, which, or some form like that, that the accumulated experience of the officers in the field is really important to this, right? And so the more training they have, the more they can interpret a situation and make good decisions and learn from the interactions and via the intervention template, the better outcomes over time, I would imagine, right? So it's good for us, I think, just to understand what how this plays out day to day from that perspective.
Yeah, and a pile of data, right? To the tune of, we write about 10,000 of these reports a year. So it starts to stack up pretty quickly, and then we're able to sort of extrapolate on the back end. Are we seeing any patterns or trends? Are we, is there an area that we need to focus? And we have provided training to officers over the years, specifically based on this. Blocks on PTSD, blocks on autism, blocks on different things, because we're collecting that information as we go through and seeing, oh, here's something we need to focus on, and then filtering that back through the CIC and having them weigh in on it. So yeah, that's the theory we're putting in place, and I think so far we've been pretty good with that. So this is just a sample of some of the information that is tracked on that template. So there's a lot of stuff, and we tried to, again, in conjunction with with our outside resources, simplifying it to the point where we turned it into a lot of checkboxes and drop down menus. So we took a little bit of the interpretation out of the hands of officers, and so that we can get consistent language and consistent responses of what that might look like. You'd be amazed at how many different ways you can refer to harbor view in a report. So trying to get concise language of everyone's using the same definition. So this is just some screenshots of what this looks like. It's a behavioral crisis report that would go in. It's what our template was. We've changed report management systems in the interim, and so they look a little different. This is an example of what that looks like. So these drop-down menus, and what we're asking officers to, again, assess. We're cops, we're not clinicians. And so we really try and focus on just words, actions, and behaviors that the officer is encountering, and then trying to, check the appropriate box. These are also, you can select more than one, right? So if officers are encountering stuff, they don't have to just select one option there. They can select as many as they think apply. So that dumps into this. And so all of those data points are then captured, and we are able to look at it on the back end and say, oh, okay, when are these calls occurring? You can see there we have first, second, third watch. We can break it down by precinct. We can look at all kinds of different information that's gathered in those various blocks and drop down menus. So as an example there, we just look at the last year, a little over 10,000 of these reports were written on a total of 6,000 individuals. So obviously there's some repeat interactions there that are occurring. That's just a general look at what that information provides us. And we can drill down into that a little bit more on the back end here, obviously, but just giving you guys a general representation of what that looks like. That also gets into our use of force stuff. So we can look at, if we have a crisis call and then there's an associated use of force, we can then start looking at that information and seeing, what does that look like? You'll see some of the numbers here up at the top. So we count things a little bit differently. So historically, we would count a use of force that occurred if there was an individual where force occurred. We just counted that as one event. We now break that down into a more accurate counting of, we might have one individual where force was used, but there might have been force by both officers involved. And so that's where you see the use of force count is different than the use of force subject count. So we track it to that level of information.
Eric, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Is any of this data information available to the public on the website?
Not to this level. So a lot of this information is, is just on the back end.
On the
There is some
dashboard?
there's some information on the dashboard, but I don't believe, well, I know to the level that this is, that's not that's not out on the dashboard.
Sorry, because I'm trying to understand the PowerPoint. Sorry
Mhm.
for interrupting again, but I just want to make sure because this is some great information. Can you kind of break it down a little bit more on exactly, I'm looking at the injuries and implements up at the top. Can you kind of break that down on what that would look like for us?
Sure. So you'll see there's just, outline figures. And so that's just a representation. And you can see it says front and back. So when officers fill out, we have a very in-depth use of force tracking system that we use. And so officers would be filling that out. They would indicate, what sort of resistance, if any, they were encountering, what sort of force that they employed, and then the figures there up at the top are a representation of where on the body the associated force corresponded with, right? And you can see over on the right side there that the largest block of force is complaint of pain only, right? So wasn't even necessarily an injury that occurred, but if we are interacting with an individual and they make a complaint of pain, whether or not an injury actually occurred, that is a reportable use of force, and we track that. And so an officer would have to do that. So you can see the blue dots there that say complaint of pain are corresponding on the figurines there, of where those complaints of pain are associated. So did that help a little bit with that?
Yes, it did. And then if you can kindly just, and this is just the last time, and after that, I promise I'm gonna shut up. I'm sorry, everybody.
But
But
no more questions. It's okay. That's why I'm here.
right. So can you elaborate a little bit more? Because and community people that are listening to this demographic is important to me in the space. Can you please explain to community a little bit more of the breakdown of the officer demographics as well as the subject demographics in the corner of the right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's exactly what you're pointing out there. So there's the demographics of the officers that were involved, and then of the subject themselves, and then it's broken down as male and female, and then the associated percentages that represent that, I guess.
Okay.
All right, I am going to keep you. We got a lot of information we're going to try and get through here. So this is just some general information that is from those crisis templates. And as you can see there, so in fact, I just pulled these this morning. So year to date so far, we're at just under 10,000 templates that we've done. And then you look at there's emergent detentions, which for familiarity of folks, that is when we involuntarily send someone up to the hospital because they meet the statutory guidelines of what's referred to as an emergent detention. So that's someone who is exhibiting that imminent likelihood of serious harm to themselves or others, or some grave disability that's occurring. And so officers would be sending folks up involuntarily to the hospital. And then the voluntary would be just that, right? They don't meet that criteria, but you have an individual that's requesting to go to the hospital, for a variety of reasons. Maybe they just want to go talk to somebody, generally non-medical. type of stuff. It's maybe they just want to go, talk to a provider or go up and get an assessment or whatever that might be. So then you get into, and this is just a sampling of some of the dispositions and outcomes. Those that have declined services, you can see about 12% of the encounters that we have, folks just decline services. Thanks, but no thanks. Mobile Crisis Team is the MCT. So that is a King County based resource. And that is a 24/7 resource that would come out. It's going to be two social workers. Basically, you have a chemical drug dependency and a mental health professional that are going to respond out to scenes that law enforcement is out with someone, and they have maybe not met any other criteria, but we offer those services, and Mobile Crisis Team would come out to respond. Case managers. So this is officers directly out on the scene that are contacting case managers and making referrals back to them of someone that they have, they're already tiered with. Then the DCRs, those are the designated crisis responders for King County, making those referrals again directly from the field. And then officers making direct referrals for shelter or treatment. So there's a question, it looks like. I see a hand raised.
Yeah, the math is befuddling me. So I see the SPD do this a lot, use words that don't have any meaning like templates. And then when you look at the numbers below that, they don't total up to anything near that. Mm-hmm. So could you explain that?
Sure. This was a sample set. This was not every single possible outcome. I just highlighted a few of the various outcomes that are the most associated with what officers are running into. So it's not supposed to add up. Templates are what I was discussing earlier with the crisis templates that officers are filling out, those reports. So
just to be clear, is if all 5 of the crisis intervention team officers appear on a site for one individual, is that 5 templates or is that 1 template?
No, that would be 1 template. And this is for all of patrol that's responding, not just our unit. Okay. Right. This is
so it's okay. That's very important because okay. So again, just to clarify this, so it's 9,842. Can we call them contacts? So there's no duplication here, right? Is that correct?
Reports written, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Again, not 3 officers writing a report for 1 incident.
Nope.
And these would be templates where at some point along the line, either early on or after the fact, a determination is made that this, even if it didn't involve the crisis intervention unit, it was a crisis intervention call. Is that?
Yeah, it was a behavioral crisis call. There was some element of behavioral crisis that was involved. So as an example, you could have an officer responds out to a domestic violence call. And during the course of that investigation, there's, some domestic violence elements. Maybe there's a crime, maybe it was just a disturbance, maybe an arrest occurred. And so the officers that are responding to that are going to write all of that paperwork up, whatever that looks like. Maybe it's an arrest, whatever, all of that. But it turns out that individual was also experiencing some behavioral crisis during the course of that. So there could also be a behavioral health template written, a behavioral crisis template written. So, it's not, they're not just standalones by themselves. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they are part of another incident that was occurring. And so there's multiple, what we refer to as supplementals within our report management system, right? So you're going to have the main report might be, there was a domestic violence incident. And then you're going to have a supplemental that is, this is the arrest report. And then a supplemental of the sergeant that screened it. And then a supplemental of various officer statements. And then a supplemental of a crisis template. So yeah, you could be doing a template associated with a totally different type of call at the same time.
I'm gonna just ask if we can. I mean, I'm really appreciating the interaction and the engagement, you guys, but I want to make sure he gets through. So Eric, you know, you kind of weigh it out, but I really wanted him to get through the presentation, and then all the rest of the time will be all for questions. So as best as you can, if you can hold off, but I'm not saying don't ask your questions.
Okay. Valerie, did you want to ask your question now, or do you want to?
Yeah, it's a very quick question,
Sure.
because you have your figures up. So under MCT contacted, the number is 527. Is that the number for a year to date, 2021?
Year to date so far, yes.
The number of times people have called 911 and specifically asked for the crisis team?
No. This is the number of times that officers were out on scene on a call with an individual, and the officers made that referral to the mobile crisis team.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Mhm.
And you don't have a number for the number of times people specifically requested the crisis intervention team?
So it's a few different things. So, and I apologize because we're law enforcement and we have a ton of acronyms. So the mobile crisis team is a King County based non-law enforcement resource.
Mhm.
That's not referring to our team of the crisis response team.
Right.
So, and people are not able to call 911 and directly request the mobile crisis team.
Ah,
That's not an option that exists, and that's them, not us. So the
so
mobile crisis team only takes referrals from law enforcement, the fire department, directly from hospitals, or from the Crisis Connections hotline.
oh, well, that's fascinating because I'm asking this question because my family experience was that quite a few years ago, I think 4 years ago, 5, my mother thought she was calling the crisis intervention team, whatever team was responsible in those days. And so she was under the impression that she was directly calling a specific team that did mental health intervention, the aid of the police. Now, I think it had a different name in those days, but that's sort of the issue that's of great pertinence to members of the public.
Mhm.
Is can we call and request a specific team? And I guess you're telling me that at this point we can't.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
so it's
And that is the hope to integrate all of that and change it down the road.
right. So
But
it's
that's
even if we call 911 and say my family member is having a mental health crisis, I need police officers who are specially trained in dealing with mental health crisis. We don't really have a guarantee that that's who we'll get, even though there are only 5 of you.
well, I'll tell you what, let me come back to that
Mhm.
if I can, and I'll talk a
Okay.
little bit about just kind of the training and the capabilities and the capacity and stuff like that,
I
if
think
that's okay.
that would be great. And I think
Okay.
that communication between 911 or whoever we're calling and what we actually get, I think that's the big gap for community members. So I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. I'll do my best.
Thanks.
All right. So without going too far down the rabbit hole with numbers, so this is just again a sampling of those 9,800 encounters. 634 of them resulted in an arrest, which is about just a little over 6% or almost 6.5%. And then we get into use of force and what that looks like. And I'll just give you, as I showed you on that earlier slide, so 199 occurrences of force, 94 individuals is what that looks like. So the numbers get a little weird, but if you can you just understand how we track that stuff, maybe that makes a little bit of sense. And the bulk of them, if you look at it, almost 70 or 69% of them are made up of type 1 use of force, which is what we were looking at in that earlier slide. So this is what that looks like. So this is our type 1. So again, we talked about the transient pain or complaintive pain. That is by far the bulk of all uses of force that the department is engaging in. And then these are type 2 and type 3. And we can certainly, I know you guys have other sessions where you're going to specifically talk about use of force and all that good stuff. So don't want to really go too much into that right here. This is more just for reference. Okay. There's something in the chat. Oh, right. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, Lauren is, make sure
Thank you,
look
Lauren.
yeah, make sure you look at your chat. Lauren is putting in some links and things, resources and references for you.
Yes. So again, just a quick reference here again from the settlement agreement. This was related to the crisis intervention training, like what we are to be doing as a department, and what that looks like. So basically, that we will continue doing training in all things crisis intervention, de-escalation, all of that stuff that's in there, which we do. There's a mandatory 8 hours a day, or 8 hours a day, 8 hours a year of training that's related to that. This is just a sampling of what our original base model was for what we refer to as tactical de-escalation, in being able to approach pretty much any and all calls, right? And going from there. So we have our scene control, doing that threat assessment, making that scene safe as best we can. We're engaging in that dialogue with our various skills that we train, active listening, or what we refer to as our open model, and then that incident resolution, our solution to it. So that's just our general overlay. This is to give you an idea. So now I'm going to transition and maybe answer some of the questions that folks were asking. So there's our unit, which is the crisis response unit. And again, we are a very niche unit. There's only 5 of us that are trying to cover the whole city. Obviously, you do the math, we can't cover 24/7. So we are available when we're available, when we're working. Then we have all the rest of the department. Okay. And there is a standard, it's referred to as a CIT certification, crisis intervention training. It's a training that was put together back in the mid 90s. And it's a 40-hour training course, and it's been updated obviously over the years, but it's a 40-hour training course that's designed specifically for law enforcement. And it is a basic primer, if you will, on recognizing signs and symptoms, behaviors associated with someone that might be experiencing some sort of behavioral health issue, crisis, what the resources are. It is it's a parade of subject matter experts and social service providers that come in and essentially teach cops and give us a crash course in what we might encounter out there. So it was a national standard. It's become an international standard. It's a 40-hour training. The Seattle Police Department adopted that program in 1998. So we have been sending officers through this 40-hour training since 1998. This is what that looks like. So this slide, these numbers are referring to officers outside of our unit that have gone through that 40-hour certification. And then that's on top of all of the folks who have received that annual training since we've been under the settlement agreement. So you can see right here, we've got, of all the patrol operations folks, 260 certified, 219 that are non-certified. It is a voluntary program. It always has been. That's CIT International's kind of hallmark, is making it a voluntary program. Their benchmark is to say that any agency that is deploying with a 40-hour CIT certification model have at least 25% of their department trained. We are currently at about 54%. So we are well above what the stated benchmark is for a CIT program. We actually were higher than that. We were pushing 70%, but due to COVID, they have not done 40-hour CIT certification training in 2 years. So the first class in 2 years is going to be January upcoming. So needless to say, we've lost a few people over the last couple of years as a department. Many of those were tenured folks that were CIT certified. And so our numbers have dropped reflecting of that. But we have people lined up for the classes that are scheduled upcoming next year. So again, just some general numbers of what that looks like in having folks that are CIT certified. So Valerie, kind of to answer your question, when you call 911 and you're asking for an officer to respond that maybe has some training in it, the likelihood is you're going to get a patrol officer that has this minimum amount of training. So 40-hour certification plus another 40 hours of training that they've received over the last few years related to crisis and de-escalation. This is more just a snapshot of our unit. Again, the crisis response unit of, the activity that we have, if you will. We as a unit have responded to some 1,200 calls for service so far this year. Doing different field outreaches and mental health courts. We do a lot of connections with those various providers and entities that are out there, support services. We also create what we refer to as response plans. Our service providers, they generally refer to those as crisis plans. We're the crisis response unit, so we call them response plans. But those are essentially individually tailored plans that are put together with our unit, so our on-staff MHPs, our officers, generally in conjunction with the service provider. So if we have an individual that's already tiered with services out in the market, we work with them directly and develop a plan. I'll give you a look at what those are. But we end up creating those, and what that does is that provides a consistency of response for patrol. So again, kind of Valerie, back to your example there of if we have developed a response plan for an individual, that's probably one of those folks that's maybe that disproportionate utilizer of 911 services that we talked about early on. We now have that plan published internally. So it's only for officers' dissemination. And that will assist them if they respond to a call involving that individual. And we build those plans to include as much information as we can related to, their support structure, right? What does that look like? Who are their contacts? Maybe who their case manager is, hooks and triggers for this individual, what has worked in the past, right, to help them stabilize, what maybe their baseline behavior is, what their elevated behavior is, if there's been any officer safety concerns, if they have housing or supportive housing or assisted services, any of that we have, we include in it so that gives officers more options when they're out in the field to try and help them out. And this is an example of what a response plan might look like. So as you can see in there, we try and put as much information as we can gather on an individual. Don't worry, this is all made up and not a real person. It's just a general example of the type of information that we're trying to provide to officers. Then we talk about resources. So again, a lot of this is in our training that we do, our annual training. And it's really about, good, bad, or indifferent, 911 is the number that people call. And law enforcement, we don't have the ability to choose not to go, right? I mean, if someone calls 911, the expectation is that services are responding. Since we are the only option when you call 911, officers are going to respond. They're going to assess the situation as best they can. And then they're going to start leaning into these resources that are available. And this is not all the resources that are available, but these are the most common ones that we utilize as the Seattle Police Department. And this is going to be everyone from patrol to folks in our unit directly. But our goal is to deflect and redirect folks out to the service provider community if we possibly can, right? We, you know, if it's not something where we have to take them to the hospital, or we, you know, have to make an arrest because there's a life safety issue or some sort of an interdiction there, if we can redirect folks to other services, we will do everything we can to try and accomplish that. Okay. I know we're kind of pushing on time. This is just some general stuff on extremist protection orders. I won't go into it too much. It's a subset of a lot of the stuff that we work on. And for those that aren't familiar with it, it might be a whole different conversation. But basically, there's a statute in Washington now. It was Initiative 1491. It was actually on the ballot back in 2016. Everybody voted for it, and it passed. And it essentially allows family members or law enforcement to step in and petition a court to have a temporary suspension and securing of an individual's firearms if they meet certain criteria. So when it was first drafted, they used the language of someone being a danger as a result of a mental health crisis or violent behavior. Through a lot of petitioning, I spent a lot of time down in Olympia talking to folks down there, and we were successfully able to get the mental health crisis language taken out and changed into just violent or threatening behavior, right? We felt that was very stigmatizing to folks that are experiencing behavioral health issues. Because there was an implication there that, oh, well, this person has a behavioral health, a mental health, a substance abuse issue, and therefore shouldn't have a firearm. And that's not really the right connection there. It should be based on if they're exhibiting specific violent or threatening behavior. So that is now how the law reads, which is good. And then this is our process. So to date, these came into existence really in 2017. Our unit alone has vetted some 265 different individuals to see if they meet that criteria of potentially petitioning for a extremist protection order. We have thus far petitioned for this year we've done a total of 45 that we've looked at, that we've petitioned for. I'm sorry, I'm reading that number wrong. We've vetted 45 this year. We've petitioned 14 of them this year. We've in total petitioned 102 of them since 2017. And you can see some of the numbers in there. If you go over to the side there, the firearms. So we've secured some 217 firearms, 23 this year alone, from individuals that met this criteria. Many of you are probably familiar with these that have been published over the years. We have another one that will be coming hopefully soon on the horizon. Do a annual-ish report. And that is what I have for that information. I know we went through a ton of stuff and just kind of a fraction of what we do, but I wanted to try and give everybody a flavor of what it looks like for our crisis response unit and crisis training in general for the department. So what questions can I try and answer for everybody?
Eric, I would be curious to know a scenario, a real scenario where crisis intervention, if not for the trained professionals, would not have worked. some of the, I just want to know like an example of a real scene, a real story of how crisis intervention works in action.
For our unit or in general for the department or?
I think I'm really wondering about the unit.
Yeah. Well, we have, we are very fortunate with the folks that we have, the mental health professionals that we have on staff. They have just been a tremendous resource for us. And we will go out to, calls. I mean, every day our folks are out responding to calls, and it's anything from, that individual that has those chronic issues that they're experiencing. And, we're just trying to help them stabilize and get them reconnected with the services that they have out there, up to we respond out to, incidents where there's maybe a barricaded subject. Maybe they're experiencing some acute behavioral crisis, and it turns into some type of a standoff, and we're able to leverage our experience as a unit. We have some very, very experienced officers that are part of our group, and then bringing the mental health professionals out there provides a layer that historically in law enforcement just didn't exist. Being able to have a mental health professional out on a call during live time while that's happening um, is a relatively novel concept to law enforcement. Seattle Police Department was one of the first agencies in the country to launch that, and we've just had a tremendous amount of success with it. I am, for those that haven't seen, Corey Williams is on the call with us here, and Corey is currently the sergeant overseeing the unit and is out there day to day operationally. So I am going to put him on the spot and see if maybe he can tell one of the more recent stories of going out.
Well, recently it seems like we've been kind of acting as the liaison between patrol responding to a lot of kind of quasi-barricaded incidents where people in some of our provider housing facilities start throwing things out of the window and onto people or cars below. And we're able to kind of identify those hooks and triggers that are effective with them, because they're usually some of our high utilizers. And we also have a lot of real-time information where our mental health professionals can actually connect with that person's either case manager or sometimes even whichever clinician they're working with, to get kind of a more recent information that law enforcement may not have, or even some information that may help kind of de-escalate the situation. Some of the bigger moments that are kind of more specific, I guess, anecdotal, that stand out to me. One of the first incidences that I kind of in my first month with this unit, which has been over 2 years now. But there was a college student who, on the anniversary of his father's suicide, was experiencing suicidal ideations and had a shotgun in his mouth that was wrestled away from him. And then he was sent up to the hospital on emergent detention, and the social worker of the hospital determined that he no longer posed a threat to himself because law enforcement took the shotgun away. When the parents came out to kind of visit their son and check up on him, they found him standing out at the intersection at 2 a.m. Brought him back home, where there's still other firearms in the house. And then that's where the crisis response unit, the very next day, stepped in to provide some of those near wraparound services that were lacking in his very abbreviated hospital stay. One of my favorite incidents that stands out is there was a family member had reached out to our unit. They were out of the city somewhere, and their adult son was experiencing some pretty significant psychosis. He had a fixed delusion that he was playing like a live action video game. And in his delusion, the other participants of the game were trying to get him to commit a mass shooting very similar to Las Vegas. And he did not want to commit the mass shooting, but was worried that as this delusion went on, he wasn't going to be able to not do it because of how the game he thought was set up against him. And he decompensated to the point, and his delusion advanced to the point where he started showing up at family members' houses armed with a armed with a handgun to protect them, because he thought other participants in the game were coming to his family's house, which he would then have to protect them. So in that state of psychosis, that person could have been an Amazon delivery person, a post office, a letter carrier. It could have just been any one of you or us just walking down the street. And we were able to intervene and divert from the criminal justice system into the mental health system, where without that law enforcement intervention would not have been able to happen, because it didn't lack, or it would have lacked the just the level of accountability that comes with still having a police response for that. And the officers that I'm very fortunate and humbled to work with do amazing work. I could probably talk about them all night. Those are just some of the ones that stand out to me.
Thank you. I'm not sure whose hand was up first, but I know I remember seeing Donna's hand up some time ago. Donna, did you still have a question?
No, I do not, but thank you for remembering.
Okay. So I'll go with my ED. Brandy, you have a question?
I had a comment, but I can wait and let community members go first.
Okay. Dr. Gale?
Dante has his hand up first.
Okay. Okay, Deontay. And thank you for being here.
Oh, no problem. And thank you for having me. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about what that psychosis looks like. When I'm looking at the one of the spreadsheets that you show with the demographics by race, it seemed like a lot more people that were assisted in this, and this is just what I'm gathering, in this framework, right? Consists of more white folks, or excuse me, of more Caucasian folks. But I just want to know, because I think that one of the things that I've noticed in my community is that a lot of Black and brown folks have been going through a lot that I've advocated for in my community have went through psychoses such as drug use. And I've noticed that as opposed to them getting certain programs such as this one, or certain safety spaces such as this one, they're getting sent straight to jail. So what, and I mean, and keep in mind, I can understand SPD's space on stating, oh, well, we don't look at that as a factor, but because of stereotypes, most black and brown folks are looked at as violent folks or consist of violent behavior. So can you elaborate a little bit more on SPD or this program's stance on assisting minorities in their spaces of psychosis, if that makes sense?
I'm going to try and unpack that a little bit and
It's a lot of shit to unpack. It's a lot to unpack, but understand. I'm looking at. I'm not stating that this program. I don't think that this. I think this program is amazing. This is no different from like a lead program as well. But to keep it all the way funky, a lot of my community members don't get this resource. They don't get it. They don't get this resource. They get sent straight to jail with no options of programs like this.
Okay. Well, we would probably have to dig into those numbers a little bit deeper, in the sense of our arrest rate of individuals in crisis is only 6% of the time that an arrest is the outcome of one of those incidents. And that would also include, like the example that I gave, where maybe you had a DV incident that occurred, a DV assault that occurred, and an arrest was there. An arrest was mandatory, but there was also a crisis element at play. So that would be included in that 6%. So, it's certainly not that's the sole outcome that's occurring with a particular population, because it's a relatively low number to begin with. but with regard to services in general and providing that to folks, we certainly strive to be providing all of the services to any of the folks that we encounter, regardless of any of the demographic characteristics that would go involved with that.
Eric, if you all don't mind, just really quick, I former life was a mental health professional, and I just kind of want to respond to something real quick. There was a couple comments being made in the chat, and hopefully, Deontay, this will be helpful too. I think it goes back to what Valerie brought up about when community members are making phone calls to 911. A lot of people were under the assumption that the mental health crisis or the alert or flagging SPD, that there was in fact a crisis going on, that there was going to be a particular subset of officers or a crisis team that was going to come out. To hear this evening that that's actually not what is happening, that there is officers that are pretty much deployed. And then it sounds to me, and make sure, correct me you all if I'm wrong on what I heard, but an officer goes out and makes the determination if the crisis team or crisis unit needs to be involved. For me, hearing that, if that is in fact correct, that is slightly problematic, and you all aren't really equipped to handle or triage, I don't feel, unless you have the skill set and the credentials to be able to triage an acute situation, to be perfectly honest with you. That's like me sending my little old grandma out to teach somebody, and not to make light of it, but to send her out to be an interpreter when she's not deaf and she doesn't know sign language, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? So there are gaps in the system, there are gaps in the process of, we are asking, you all are civil servants, and I understand that, and you're going out to protect and serve, but you're not mental health professionals. I, as someone who has spent 8,000 plus hours, 2 graduate degrees to be certified to do that type of work, that's a difficult assessment to make when there are actually multiple things going on at one time. So I hope we're all, like, for us that help with like recommendations, we have the monitor on here, CPC, and even SPD too as well. This is an opportunity for us to hear from folks, like where those gaps are and how things are actually playing out. We're employing people to do something that they're not necessarily equipped to do. I heard a referral is made by the officer versus when Miss Valerie was like, when her family called in the past, they actually thought they were requesting crisis assistance in that moment. That's very different. So I just wanted to kind of clarify and add that little piece there as well.
Yeah, and to your point, Brandy, you're exactly correct. I mean, we say that all the time. We're cops, not clinicians. The rub there is that we are the only option as it exists, right? So when someone calls 911, there is not a function of, press 1 for cops, press 1 for a clinician to come out, or press 2 for a clinician, press 3 for, that functionality, that system doesn't exist. You're 100% correct there. And so we are asking officers to go out and try and make that assessment. And so the route that we've tried to take internally, right, when we do our training and our messaging and all that good stuff, is offer all the resources, right? Because all we can do is say, well, these are the, again, words, actions, and behaviors that I'm encountering. And so if I'm encountering certain things, then I should start offering resources and try and redirect people to services. We absolutely are not trying to do any type of, diagnosis or clinical breakdown of what people might be experiencing or how that interacts. Absolutely not. That's not a thing that can happen. Like I say, the training that those folks go through, like yourself, to get to that point is not something that is integrated into law enforcement. And we heavily advocate for a third option, right? Of saying, yes, please, let's have a non-law enforcement response to many of these calls. And we know that of these 10,000 calls, we know there's a big chunk of them where, yeah, we probably don't need to send a cop out to this call.
And I don't want to negate the fact that what Deontay brought down, I'm probably butchering your name and I apologize. But I don't want to take away from the fact that, yes, based on the numbers and kind of data, it appears that Black and brown folks, when they have these interactions with law enforcement, they're going, like he mentioned, maybe straight to jail. But when that's a point of, definitely there are layers there, but I think there's also a point of, we have to still look at process and outcome. Because if I go out and I don't know that this person has a co-occurring situation is playing out, I'm not going to be able, I'm not making excuses. It's layers to this. And I just want to make sure that people really fully understand what all comes into play with this.
Yeah.
I think Emily was off mute. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, so in those demographic numbers, that wasn't any of the outcomes as far as whether people were going to jail or an arrest was made or anything like that. None of that stuff was on that demographics slide. So if there's an interpretation there, it's not based off of that information on the slide.
So you do not, I'm sorry to interrupt here, but do you not then have demographic data that tells how many are going to jail versus how many are receiving referrals to you?
We don't specifically break that down on that crisis template. That's a question I would defer to Lauren Atherley on if there was a call for a deep data dive into what that looked like. But that's not something that's pulled up on this particular.
Yeah, and that information is available. We do typically report it in our annual reports for crisis for the past several years, and the online data that we have, I think, probably includes the demographic data. Our team does push out a number of public data sources. This is one of those data sources where we've been a little more conservative with identifying information. We don't want to discourage somebody from contacting help because they think that data that even sort of tangentially points to who they might be could be used to identify them. But that data is available. The outcomes as well as demographics of the subject are available.
Eric, I know that. We have 3 other people who are patiently waiting. I just at this moment right here would like for you to, if you know, how this type of system works in Portland with the CAHOOTS program. They have a different number that they can call for crisis. Is that correct?
Yeah, CAHOOTS is the functionality of CAHOOTS and the services that they're going to provide are very similar to what already exists up here in King County. They just have a different ability to make those referrals as they come in, right? Instead of having to funnel it through law enforcement. But essentially the mobile crisis team and the crisis solution center and the diversion facility and those things, that essentially acts very similar to what CAHOOTS acts as, right? For those resources. It's just their input method, if you will, right? So folks can call and they can get directly routed to that, which is the model that they're working towards here in the city, right? That was with taking our 911 dispatch out from under the police department and making it part of the city as a response there. And then all of that is folded into the new 988 legislation. And for those that aren't familiar, I would suggest looking it up. That is an entire conversation in and of itself, but that's the whole point of 988, is to have essentially a one number input. And then those calls are triaged as they come in and then parsed out accordingly. So kind of going back to Valerie's question of, hey, I want to call someone and I just want to get a service provider to be able to come out. When that call comes in through 988, it would get routed to that resource theoretically, and law enforcement wouldn't be responding to that at all. So that's the whole kind of point behind 988 and where they're going with it. But it's going to take a while to get that launched. I mean, I wouldn't expect anything for at least a couple of years as far as a functionality for it. I know it's supposed to launch next year, but it ain't going to be fully up and running. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. Dr. Gill?
Yeah, excuse me. so this isn't really a question, but what we're talking about is far less than 0.5% of officers that are in this unit. And we're also talking about officers that have 40 hours of crisis intervention training. If memory serves me correctly, Officer Gregorio, who murdered Terry Caver in 2020, had crisis intervention training. So what I think we're missing is in 2015, Camden, New Jersey police were sent to Scotland to learn how they deal with people that are in mental health crisis, how they deal with people that have edged weapons, blunt weapons, an assortment of weapons, and can be very violent. And I think that's a very different model than what we're talking about here, because I think actually what we're talking about here, trying to parcel out how to deal with people that are in mental health crisis, is actually going to end up getting more people killed, not less people. It's going to get more people killed, and I can explain that later. But what we have to have eventually is a police force that's capable, like they do in Scotland and they do in the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, in over 25 years now, not one person has been shot with an edged weapon. And we're talking about people with swords and machetes and katanas and all kinds of things. So I think that's one issue, is we're really getting into something that's serving very few people. And to go back to what Deontay said, the reality is this, is since the beginning of the consent decree, or since the beginning of the police reform in Seattle, we've had 11 people killed by SPD that are in mental health crisis. 11 people. It's about one per year. And we had 2 just in the last year and a half. So I think the issue is, and by the way, those people, although one of them was a person of color, one of them was white, the vast majority of the 11 are in fact people of color. And I think most people of color are not going to want to call for a police if there's a mental health crisis. And very often that will result in it spinning out of control and ending up very violent. So again, what I would like to see, we're having a very boxed in and limited discussion based on trying to section off tiny little percentages of who gets contacted by police, when there is another model, and that is police should really be serving the community. And as they say in the United Kingdom, in America, what police say is we need to come home, we need to go back to our families. We need to go back alive. In the United Kingdom, the watch phrase is everyone goes home alive. And that's the part of the cultural element of this that's missing.
So Dr. Gill, I appreciate your engagement, but we're not in Scotland, so we're having to deal with the situations that are here at hand, and that's what we're here for. We're trying to figure out. We're trying to, be or put in some input before the monitor goes back to the judge to say this is what the community has spoken out on. This is what we're, what they're looking for. So let's hone in right here in Seattle for right now.
No, I'm sorry, Felicia. I just said, actually numerous, it's not just Camden, the Police Executive Research Forum, which is police, takes officers from the United States to be trained in the United Kingdom. This is a program that's been going on for over 6 years. So this is 100% relevant. It's what we could be doing, okay?
Duly noted, so that maybe that is other than cahoots and some of the other programs, that is maybe something we can look into for the model of it. I get that, but it's we're trying to work through these issues. I'm gonna let Mother Walden. You've had your hand up for some time. Thank you for your patience, and thank you to Dr. Gill for your comments.
Oh, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you. I had to leave and come back, and I'm sure someone has already mentioned this. I just want the African-American community, and that's who I'm specifically talking to right now, to let them know that after the killing of Beauregard Mitchell in 1986 or 87, mothers are led to lead on in working to get a crisis intervention model here. We went to Portland, brought it back. Before that time, it was no specific training, for police officers to deal with people who had had a mental ill crisis. And Mr. Mitchell was 84 years old. He lived over there behind Walgreen in the housing back there. So just want to let you know that there was some real effort that was thought into it, even though it might need to have some, looking at that what has to do to make it better. But I just like our community to know that there was an effort for Mothers Police Accountability to lead the effort to be able to. That was under Norm Stamper that we first actually brought in the crisis intervention. It was based on the model that Portland had, and they did have MSWs working with the police in Portland at that time. So I'm sorry, you probably already know some of this stuff. Also, I'm concerned about, I know the 911 call center has been moved out, but who's going to have oversight over the 911? Because it's the calls that come in that the way that the calls get handled sometimes is the problem. And so with the 911 call center been moved out of the police department, and so I'm concerned about oversight because we know that there's a problem with the 911 call center. We've had anecdotal information about that, and did absolutely wanted to put that on the IG's work plan to be able to actually do audit of the 911 call center. I know that all these steps they were all meshed together on the consent decree and all of that. So I just want to make sure that people understand what has happened over there about oversight and that kind of stuff. So thank you. That's all I wanted to comment on. But also, I know you probably talked about the amount of calls they have, and most of the calls are absolutely answered, and people have been able to get to a call review to be able to have an evaluation and to be able to get some services. The other problem is too, is a revolving door. You take people at the Harvard review within 72 hours. Sometimes they don't even hold them for 72 hours. They're back in the same situation sometimes. So that there's a big gap between crisis intervention, getting people to Harvard review, getting people services, so they're not back in the same situation. I don't know if that's part of anybody's conversation tonight, but I think we have to look at the holistic piece. And then when we talk about some of these other places, they're homogeneous countries or homogeneous places that have very few African Americans or other people of other nationalities or ethnic groups in some of these other places. Thank you.
Thank you, Mother Walden. I used to work at Novels Mental Health, and it really has been a revolving door. It's so sad. I could work on a case and can almost mark it on my calendar when that patient would be coming right back through the door. It was just that obvious that there is definitely a gap that is holistic, and what it does boil down to is our police department when it gets to a certain point. So there is a lot more to the whole picture. You're right. Dr. Artelli, did you have your hand up?
I just wanted to kind of build on some of these comments, just almost as a prelude to our session in January, because I do resonate with what Dr. Gale is talking about in the context of the great work that Lieutenant Piskanski is doing and Sergeant Williams. What is it's really a baseline, right? They've leaned in over the past really decade to build new capacity within SPD to respond to people that have that are in crisis, right? But it's a baseline, right? So I think as we go into January and we look at, say, how we develop ideas around this to make this better, one is to get to say, what can we do to what should SPD do for the city in order to scale up that ability to respond with crisis intervention officers? How much can we get more training? Can we have more officers engage in this? How do we scale that up? But also things like, are there new training or that can impact culture change, new forms of training that maybe we should be looking at? There is some, even though it's different societies, different countries, there is some relevance in our world to saying how do they do this in the UK? How do they do this in Scotland? How do they do this in Dublin, Ireland, for example? That's actually pretty progressive on this, in order to help people in crisis that may have a weapon. And so there's very different tactics that they use that we might be able to look at in Seattle. And then third is, what new types of services should we be standing up? If we can't, if SPD can't do this alone, which they can't, right? We can't have 100% of the officers expertly trained in crisis intervention. And if there are communities that would like to have other types of services, what does that look like? That's a solid question we should be asking going into these coming meetings, to then say, well, what types of services and programs could be stood up that are, that could be new. And so keep thinking about those types of things, because they will be important as we go forward, along with some of the infrastructure needs in this. So the Reverend Walden, your question around 911, it's an interesting question that I don't readily have an answer to. But in other cities, there have been studies around bias, for example, of 911 operators when they may hear a voice that they interpret as someone that's a minority versus someone that might be non-minority, and they'll send different capabilities because of that bias. And I have no idea if that's happening in Seattle. I don't know if any of us do, but the infrastructure and the training that goes with the people and that infrastructure, like 911 and 988 as that comes online, will be critically important, probably for CPC in the city to take on. Right now, that's not part of the consent decree, but someone needs to be looking at that. So keep these ideas going, because I think these are all really illustrative of what we're looking for when we go into the engagement sessions in January and on.
Great. I saw Jacob. Did you still have a question?
No, I don't have a question. I hit the button by mistake, but I think since I have a chance to comment, I will say that I think the bias played a big role in responding to crisis events. And I think the African American community, one of them is, sometimes what is perceived in the media on how the response is different when it's not a African American, and kind of explaining that. I think implicit bias that training is really important to assist with how we respond to people of color that's suffering a mental crisis.
Thank you for your comments. There are comments in the chat, so available for everybody to read. I won't go through them all. Are there any more comments, questions, concerns here on the call? Okay. So like Dr. Oftelli said, we're going to be really getting involved in some of these conversations in the next coming meeting. So please come back, because we want to keep this dialogue going. I could, I shared with Mother Walden not long ago that I sat in the 911 call center once, and it was quite interesting to sit and listen. Now it's extremely busy. They got like 6 screens up at one time, but I felt like every time it was a call about a minority person, they labeled black male, blah blah blah. But when it was a white person, the call was about, she never made a label on it. And so I asked the question, and the 911 operator, she was like, "No, I didn't do that. No." I'm sitting here watching you. I'm taking it in as I'm seeing it happen. So I don't think that sometimes they even realize or recognize. And so it is a point, a place where we should also not just dismiss and pay attention to, I believe. So if there is nothing else, I will give you guys back a little bit of your time. I think, let me see. We got about 15 more minutes. So I appreciate everybody being on the call tonight. If there's nothing else, then I will let you go. Thank you.
I think you have one more question from Dr. Gale, potentially.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to be the one to not have people claim their 15 minutes. But again, I want to return to this. Look, there's a paucity of people here. There's an overabundance of people that have been at these meetings that either work for the city or work for one of the accountability partners. There's a lack of engagement. I can tell you, I can't get people to these meetings because they've given up on the system. So it doesn't help anyone when we spend, 80, 90% of a meeting getting information. And as I said, information that's sort of boxed in and limiting. So I would request that there be given a lot more space for community, and not just that, but also what happens in these meetings. I don't see any material outcome in terms of, is there a paper issued? Are the videos put up on the internet besides me doing it? There seems to be no discussion in CPC meetings. So again, I would respectfully ask that a little more community engagement, the actual engagement part happen, hearing from the community, and that there be some clear outcomes to these. And last thing I'll say is just to be really clear here. The meeting that Brandy referred to back in February, where people were asked, it was the first and only real community engagement until these, where people could speak freely. Every single person on that call in February requested that OPA investigations no longer be done by police officers. The very week after that meeting, the CPC voted the opposite of that. So I want to be really clear on this, that there seems to be a little bit of a fuzziness as to what the purpose of these meetings are and what's going to be done with the input if people have input. So that's
well, I appreciate your comments. As you know, as a community engagement director, I've only been on the department for a short few months, and getting acclimated to the work here. So this is what our third meeting, I think, under my direction, and that's why I continue to recognize and acknowledge and welcome your concerns and your comments. And I don't know how things used to be, but I know the direction that I am trying to lead the group now. And so that's why I continue to say, please give me your, send me an email, send me your comments. I'm listening. But we can't solve every issue. And you come up with a lot of great things, but then there are a lot of things that don't pertain. They're world issues. They're definitely problems within our society. But our goal here is to try to make the Seattle Police Department and our community as safe as we can. And I know it's a democracy, Valerie, I get that. But can you guys help me to reel it in just a little bit until we can get on a solid ground where we can then, move out to bigger, more robust concerns that we might be able to try to conquer. But I ask you, I solicit your participation to go out and continue to tell the people out there. There's a new director. The meetings are a little bit more engaging. You may not like all the education or the teaching or presentations, but there's a reason for that, because a lot of people don't know what you know. You know a lot. You keep up with this stuff. You have a lot of statistics and data and everything, but not every community member is on that level. And so we have to meet people where they are as well, because we want people to go into these conversations with the same amount or some form of the amount of knowledge that you and Valerie have. You guys are very, very up on these conversations. So I'm asking, as a director, a new director to this position, I don't know what happened in the past. I wasn't in on these calls, that you will work with me to make this commission about the community so that we can make this commission serve the community at large. I ask that of you. Valerie, you very shortly, and then Reverend Walden.
Honestly, I think that's what I'm doing here. I think when you're discussing policing, you're discussing a power structure that has the ability to take lives, that you're going to have a robust discussion. It's just not possible to have honest community conversations where some people don't don't agree. No one is shouting in this conversation. No one has insulted anyone. I, and I don't think we need to be agreeable. I just think we need
No.
to be civil and honest. And, actually, the best meetings are probably ones where there is a huge range of points of view expressed. It may be uncomfortable for the CPC, but honestly, I think you signed up for it because this is policing and people die. It is, and it is one of the hardest parts of our society to change because of racism, which you know about, and
Of course I do.
because of the institutionalized use of force. So, my experience of these meetings as a member of the public who has experienced, really harmful policing is that I'm sorry, CPC, if it's hard for you to hear that members of the public have a different point of view, but isn't that the point of the meeting?
Yes, but we got to stay, we can't just, I want to reach a goal. I want to set a goal. Like I'm wanting to have these meetings right now so that the federal the monitor can hear. And he's taking, obviously he's chimed in, he's listening, he's taking in the information that you guys are giving, so that's all I'm saying. And I do appreciate the fact that you have, both you and Dr. Gill and everybody else on the calls have been respectful, and I don't expect you to just agree. That's not, it wouldn't be worth having the meetings at all. So I'm not disagreeing with you bringing your side and your point of view. All I'm asking is that we stay on task with the matters at hand while the monitor is here to hear about what we can do to make Seattle better. That's all, just for now.
Well,
It's not about,
that is absolutely what we are doing.
Okay.
That is
Well, I
absolutely
thank
what
you.
I think we are doing.
Okay, well, I thank you and I appreciate you, and make sure you bring someone else along. Get the message out about the meetings. We can make them what we want them to be. And so no one's being shut down. I hope you acknowledge and recognize that. It's always, as long as there's a respectful dialogue, no one's getting shut down. Everybody is being heard. So thank you. I appreciate you. Mother Wallen.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I just want to take a minute to speak. I'm speaking as Mothers Police Accountability right now, and sometimes we hear from other people that don't live in our community. They like to come and they speak, and they speak greatly for us. But this is for us, by us. I mean, and the people who brought the DOJ to town, I mean, and all of that kinds of stuff were actually people in the streets who's working with African American people and other people, not coming to have an opinion, but not working closely with Dante or other people who actually been in the trenches doing the work all the time. And so at some point, along the way, the people who are absolutely affected need to be able to have some space and be able to have some conversation also, and not have other people speaking for us all the time. We can speak for ourselves from time to this. I'm speaking for mothers right now, not as a commissioner at all. So I just wanted to let you know that that's how I feel about it. And it's a lot of people who are already doing the work and trying to make it a better place and trying to continue to do that without that. And, we take the heat, mothers take the heat. So I take the heat tonight in saying that I appreciate what we're doing. I appreciate you in this position. And yeah, it is hard work. And other people who have not lived a day in our community sometimes comes and they want to just monopolize, have not lived a day in our community and want to talk to us about what our lived experience is. Thank you.
Reverend Walton, I certainly hope that you're not addressing that comment to me because I come to these
Well,
meetings
we're not gonna have
speaking from
that.
personal experience. I just want to set the record straight.
Thank you. Gregory Davis, thank you for being on the call. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm just wondering, do you have any last comments that you might want to make? Because you're doing the work out here and you're doing it with the youth. And, admire and thank you for the unspokenness work you're doing out here in the community.
Well, thank you. I'm honored that you would give me this opportunity. I surely don't expect it like when I come into a meeting late. So much respect to everybody who's on this call. One of the reasons I was late is because I am also a member of the Rainier Valley Creative District, which has just been so awarded by Arts Law in the state of Washington. And we will attest that the arts and creativity is one of the ways to get at, these issues that is being experienced in this arena. I work for Rainier Beach Action Coalition, and we are working on a research project with George Mason University, where we are looking at how activation of space contributes to the reduction of the incidences that contribute to youth crime. They did a study on Seattle where they learned 50% of the crimes happen at 5% of the places. So they thought Rainier Beach would be a good place to do this research. And we deploy young people to do what we call corner greeting or youth and neighborhood engagement. And in the first 3 or 4 years, the crime in those designated spaces decreased by 40%. So we've got a model that we're researching, that we're partnering with the City of Seattle, with King County Boys and Girls Club, Seattle Public Schools, that's proven to work. And given an opportunity, maybe in the future, we can go a little bit more in depth about it. And we've got a town hall this Friday where we are sharing the outcomes of some of that work. So thanks, Felicia, appreciate it. And I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, and please share that information so we can put it on the CPC website as well. I look forward to doing more work with you. Mr. Pang, I just wanted to see if do you have any concerns or anything you want to mention from your community?
Well, at this point, I think I'm listening to everybody and trying to sink in all the information. I don't have anything specific for now. So I will keep coming and keep engaging with you guys.
Thank you so much. I sure appreciate you. Let us know if there's anything we can do, any topics you want to cover. With all that being said, it is 9 o'clock. Well, it's 9 o'clock here in Tucson, where I'm at. Thank you, everybody. Everybody's much appreciated. Dr. Ofteli, if you had any last comments, you're free. Lieutenant, thank you so much for always showing up.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Dr. Ofteli?
No, just please join us for the January, what date? January 11th session. Would love to have all of you and tell others in your community to join us as well. The more voices, the better.
Okay. Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good night.